Hello, friends and family. Welcome to the bonus episode of Fred Gilbert, Alta Rivers Gilbert Thornton's brother. In this episode, I'm going to share with you what I have learned about Fred Gilbert, who becomes Fred Hedge. I wasn't planning on getting into Fred's history because I felt it wasn't really my place. I'm not a direct descendant of his, but also because it's quite tragic. But as has been the case in my research, I had a moment where I felt Fred Gilbert wanted to be found. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but I just had this moment where I felt like Fred deserves to be remembered for more than what one or two newspaper articles say about him. So let's see what there is to learn about Fred Gilbert Hedge. As a reminder, Fred Gilbert was the youngest boy of Samuel and Caroline Gilbert. Caroline Gilbert died on March 17th, 1886, when Fred would have been about 7 years old. We don't know what happened to Fred after the passing of his mother, the same as we're unsure about Alta and the rest of her siblings. We are told by Alta's grandchildren that she was thought to be placed in an orphanage in Indianapolis. We still don't know which one, and we have been on the search for her in this series. We also can't be certain what may have been different for a 7-year-old boy versus an infant baby as Alta was. So it was very possible that, he went somewhere else. But whatever happened to him, we know that he finds his way back to southern Indiana by the time of the 1900 census, living in Switzerland County, the same as his brother Robert and his grandmother Eliza. This is a screenshot from my family tree on Ancestry. You'll see that Fred is circled in gold, and in blue circles are the Gilbert siblings. And I'm just realizing that I actually messed up. I have figured out that Myra Gilbert is not the wife of Floyd Gilbert. If you see episode 3, I corrected it there, but I'm just going to go ahead and flag that here. I have found no other records for Floyd Gilbert, and that was not his wife. Okay, so here is that 1900 census. He's working as a farm laborer on a farm where the family's last name is Geedy. In fact, he's the only one of the Gilbert siblings who is not living with another family member, except for Alta, of course, who we still have not found in 1900. But he is still in Switzerland County, so at least he's nearby his father, brother, and grandmother, Eliza. As a reminder, if you haven't seen the other episodes, here is a map of Switzerland County, the gold star being in the Jefferson Township where we find Fred. We ended episode 3 with this obituary for Fred Hedge. Let's review it again. Fred Hedge passed away at his residence after weeks of illness. He has been in failing health for years. Born on June 11, 1880 in Vevey, Indiana, he was the son of Samuel and Alice Babb Hedge. He married Mary Ellen Bright on June 4, 1904. Mr. Hedge was a retired farmer and a carpenter and was a member of the Baptist Church. He is survived by his wife, 2 sons, Ray Hedge and Clyde Hedge, both of Bedford, and several daughters, Miss Margaret Bevers, Mitchell, Miss Eva Quakenbush, Miss Violet Owen, Miss Maud Spencer, and Miss Anne Stratton, all of Muncie, and Miss Helen Davis of Bedford. He is also survived by 19 grandchildren and a Miss Alta Thompson, Madison, Indiana. It ends by saying that he was laid to rest in the Green Hill Cemetery. If you have not seen the other episodes, then you won't know. Fred was actually born to Samuel and Alice Babb Gilbert, not Hedge. And his sister was Alta Thornton of Madison, Indiana, not Thompson. So this leads me to believe that maybe not even his family knew about his life before marrying Mary Ellen Bright. And I wonder if they ever met his family, or if they did they go along with the fake identity? I've just got so many questions, so many questions. But let's go ahead. I usually try to keep all of the episodes to 15 or 20 minutes. So I don't know how long this one will take. We'll try to be quick about it, but still give everybody the information. Again, just for the benefit of anyone who may not have seen the previous episode, here's the 1880 census for Craig, Indiana, in Switzerland County. You see Samuel and Caroline Gilbert, multiple siblings, and Fred. So please watch episode 3 if you want to better learn about his family. Okay. When I started doing research into the family, I saw a few newspaper articles that had headlines like this, which of course are awful. And I'm going to go through them in order of publication. I don't remember the order that I found them. And I won't read all of them word for word. So feel free to pause if you would like. This first one published June 18th, 1900, and the headline reads, Frederick Gilbert shoots and fatally wounds. The story goes on that a Miss James Banta, actually her name is Susie, we're going to call her Susie Banta, was shot, that she will not live until morning, and immediately assigning motive because Miss Banta's daughter Pearl was refusing to marry Samuel. It says Gilbert, who is only 20 years old, was but a few feet from Miss Banta, and she was shot and fired, and the full load took effect. He shot without a moment's warning, according to the article. So it says he was on the run, that he was arrested near Brooksburg and taken to Madison. So there's no denying that this is a horrible event and that young Fred Gilbert acted outrageously, criminally, and deserves whatever consequences he's about to face. At the same time, as I said in my opening, something came up that compelled me to give Fred his opportunity to be heard. I learned later, very much later, we're talking about after years of researching, right before I'm about to hit record on these episodes, something popped up and I realized that actually Miss Banta did not die, that her brother-in-law was the town sheriff, and while there was no excuse for Fred's behavior, for him, there was more to the story. And as often happens today, the media right away was declaring his guilt of murder before all the details were collected. So I'm just going to walk through these articles, like I said. This is actually the one that made me change my mind about telling his story. It's quite long, and so I'm just going to hit on some key points. This one says that Fred originally denied his identity and was said to know nothing of the shooting, but he was arrested anyway. They found the gun on him. A few minutes after being jailed, a reporter was granted access by the janitor, and Fred confesses to the reporter. Here it names his father as Samuel Gilbert and says he has always worked on a farm. This is really the only one that presents his side of the story. It says that there were two younger children in the yard and he wanted to frighten him, and that he, quote, banged away with his shotgun. He claimed not to see Pearl or Miss Banta. Then it says that he went to his father's house and told him that he did not think that Miss Banta was badly hurt and that he hoped she would recover. Sadly, he tells the reporter that he has no friends and wouldn't care if he were hanged. In the third column here at the top, highlighted in yellow, is a physical description of Fred. It says, Gilbert is not a vicious looking fellow by any means, but appears to be not overly intelligent, and his strong attachment to the girl probably unbalanced his mind. He is rather slender, dark complexioned, and has a smooth face. He weighs about 135 pounds. Find it interesting. Now we've got documentation that both Robert and Fred were described as being dark complexioned. Then it goes on to tell the sheriff's version. Notice not the family's version, but the sheriff. The sheriff says that Gilbert comes of, quote, poor stock, but he was not addicted to drink. And then we learn that the sheriff is the brother in law of Miss Banta. So Miss Banta is married to James, and James is the brother of the sheriff. The article concludes with a recounting of the family story being told by the sheriff. It says that Fred fired 56 shots. I don't really understand this. I meant to ask my husband before I started recording. 56 seems impossible to me. Do they mean 5 or 6 shot? I'm not a gun person, so I don't know. It says that 5 of them were lodged in Miss Banta's throat, nose, and face, and under the right eye. So again, Fred was definitely in the wrong here and deserves punishment. I can't help but to think, however, that he never had a chance of a fair trial, especially with articles like these. Another article of the same date, this one says that murder was committed because a girl refused to keep company with a young man. This article says that Miss Banta was hit in the face, neck, and shoulders, so a little bit different than the other article as well. This one is 3 days after the shooting, and it's still claiming that murder was committed. This one is 4 days after the shooting and says that Fred ambushed the home. And here Miss Banta is terribly wounded and may not recover. Another article, this one at least giving a little bit of Gilbert's side and saying that he did not see Miss Banta and that he fired shots to frighten the children. This short article, a couple weeks after the shooting, said that Fred tried to commit suicide but was prevented. Now we're in September and we learn that Miss Banta does not die. He was tried for attempted murder, shooting with intent to kill. I think that it's safe to imagine, based on those 2 newspaper clippings that gave a little bit of his side, that his defense was that he only meant to frighten those younger children. At least we learn here that Sheriff Banta was recused from the trial because of his personal relationship to the victim. September 24th, 1900, we learn that Fred was sentenced to 14 years in jail. It probably would be possible to find the court records for, which would be interesting. For probably the 5th time, I don't want to come across as defending Fred's actions or minimizing them. I didn't know Fred. I don't know Pearl or Miss Banta, and I definitely wasn't around in 1900 whenever all of this took place. But I can't help but to think right out of the gate that it would have been impossible for Fred to receive a fair trial, and that some of these things, the sheriff talking to the newspaper the way they did, letting the reporter in the cell block, just seems like things that wouldn't happen today. But also, I've read some super interesting books. It's a murder and mayhem series. There are a few actually for Indiana. And I just find it interesting too that at this time, there are people that do way worse things and have much less punishment than these 14 years in jail. So, again, I'm not defending him. I definitely think if you go off shooting guns, even if it is an accident, there've got to be consequences for the actions. But I don't know. Something about me just wants to say poor Fred. Poor Fred, a young boy, 20 or 21 years old, is in love with Pearl. Things seem to be going good for him. They were spending time together. The father apparently liked Fred, but then something changed and he wanted to go to a prayer meeting with her. And then I guess, depending on which version of the story you believe, things go south and then somehow ends up getting sentenced to prison for shooting the mother. So, quite tragic. And that's what I was worried about, the ancestry online trees that have maybe just captured one story saying that, Fred Hedge was a murderer. Fred Hedge got in some trouble. He did something wrong, stupid, bad. He was sentenced to jail, but it actually was not for murder. So glad that we could at least clear him up for that. Interestingly, I learned from the Indiana archives that Fred Gilbert escapes prison after only 2 years. And I had found something early on in my research that I cannot seem to place my hands on now. But apparently, Fred just walks out of jail one day. Like, I feel like I saw an article or something about it that just said that he walks out of jail. And because this is the time period before government issued IDs and social security numbers, I imagine Fred had no problems changing his surname to Hedge. So let's go through his life as a Hedge because I actually find more for Fred than I do any of the other Gilbert siblings. And I feel like he's got a little bit of a redemption story. Here's a picture of his wife, Mary Ellen Bright. I still have not found a picture of Fred or actually any of the Gilbert siblings, which I feel like in of itself is a clue. But this article announces the marriage in Bedford at the First Christian Church to Mr. Fred Hedge. Here's Fred making an honest living selling apples. This is a society page entry that Fred's son and grandchildren visited him and his wife in Bedford, Indiana, one Tuesday afternoon. This is an article that sounds like just a lovely birthday dinner gathering. It says that watermelon was served as a refreshment afterwards. It would appear that maybe Fred wasn't able to make this event. Perhaps he was working, but I love the visual of his family having a happy gathering. And these were the people that he loved most in the world, and that he had the opportunity to have this family. I didn't find any other news sources until 8 years later. This article is from 1944. The headline there, Clyde G. Hedge listed missing on Italy front. If you go down in the first highlight, it says Fred Hedge, 20, son of Mr. and Mrs. Fred Hedge of Bedford, is missing. And on that second column there, it says at the bottom, Mr. and Miss Hedge have another son, Ray Hedge, 35, who is serving in the Navy and is at present in a hospital in Rhode Island. 6 months later, our Fred has an auto accident. He was a passenger thrown from a car. Thankfully, he only suffered minor cuts and bruises and had no broken bones, according to this article. Only a month after Fred's auto accident, his son Cecil gets married, and it sounds like it was a beautiful occasion. I absolutely love reading these old recounts of weddings in the newspaper columns. It sounds like it was quite the special event. Only a month after the wedding, more good news for the Hedge family. This time, Clyde Hedge, 21, is liberated from a Nazi prisoner of war camp. It goes on to say that the son of Mr. and Miss Fred Hedge had been held in Germany since August 24th of the previous year. In the second column, it says Private Hedge wrote his parents from a prison camp in Germany last November, and he was being held prisoner and was all right. And then at the bottom, it reminds the reader that Mr. and Miss Hedge have another son, Ray, who is 36 and serving in the United States Navy. So I presume he was out of the hospital at this point. And then tragedy strikes again. Just a terribly sad story. This is only 2 months after his marriage. Cecil Hedge dies in a car accident along with his 2-year-old son, Philip. Also involved in the accident in another car was Fred's daughter, Violet, but thankfully she survives. Here is a photo of Cecil on the right and Violet on the left. I wonder how much Cecil looked like Fred and the other Gilbert siblings. This is just another article about the same accident. Feel free to pause and read. And here's Fred Hedges' death announcement. Lastly, here's a clipping for the rites. The service was officiated by a pastor and included traditional songs such as It Is Well With My Soul.